one general finding that we had was one of the questions that we had is advertising more likely to break through at certain stages of the path of purchase? So, aside from specific media channels, how does in general advertising kind of work at each of these stages across these categories? And so what we found, I'll put it all up there, and this represents the recall of advertising. So advertising breakthrough at each stage, and you can see for beauty and food that as you get closer to purchase, people are more receptive to advertising. Their their minds are a little bit more open to it. The seed has been planted that they're buying something, and so they're a little bit more open. Whereas auto, it's a little bit different, and it's different because so it does go up into the evaluation stage. So people are seeking out information. They're more open to advertising. But then when you get to purchase, it kind of levels off, and that's because the role of the dealership is such an important part of the process. And so they're more interested kind of now at the dealership level and really starting to kind of negotiate and talk very, very specifically about features. So want to get into beauty, and I'll go through each of the categories at a very high level in terms of the role of each channel. The first thing that we looked at in terms of the role of media in each category was trust. And so in this case, for beauty shoppers, when looking for information about beauty, which channels do they trust? Because as we saw from the media connectivity model, that trust is a really important component along along the path of purchase, but also kind of leading up to purchase and persuasion. And what we found is that magazines were out of the number of channels that we measured. I'm only going to show you the top three here. Magazines were number one, followed by TV, and newspapers as well. So like the fashion section of the beauty section of newspapers. So this is kind of rank in terms of trust. The other important thing to note here is the trust levels of the influencer. So just on the number on the right hand side there, amongst those who are influencers or advocates of the category, the level of trust that they have in each channel. You can see that it's much higher than just a general shopper, which is the case across all channels. But you can start to see how magazines start to kind of create a gap amongst those shoppers, which isn't a surprise given what we saw earlier. In terms of digital, so emails were very powerful or very trusted source of information for shoppers in this category. And now emails could be from the brand, could be from magazine brands or other kind of sources of email that consumers get about the specific category, email lists, for example. And then number two, at 22% trust, are magazine websites. And then followed by, tied for kind of third place, social media, and then also magazine apps. So what's interesting here is we also measured, general online, as you saw earlier. We measured general mobile ads as well. And so what's interesting here, and what's I think important from a media effectiveness point of view, that magazine websites and also magazine apps perform much better on trust than their other digital counterparts. In terms of, so now getting to the path of purchase, so at each stage, and I'll roll it out for the other two stages as well. So at the consideration stage, we asked people, did you notice advertising? And if they did, what channel do you recall seeing advertising, for beauty in? Now, TV takes the top spot, and then magazines kind of a strong number two. So it's really two channels playing kind of the most important role kind of in this category in the consideration stage. You move through to evaluation, again, TV and magazines continue to be very strong, and then also all the way through to purchase. And an interesting thing to note here is that magazines gets stronger as you get closer to purchase. TV has a slight decline kind of from consideration to evaluation, and then flattens off in purchase. So for beauty, magazines actually become more important, more influential as someone is getting closer to the actual final purchase. In terms of, we also wanted to get a better understanding of, for each channel, the stickiness of advertising. So amongst those who are using the channel, how likely are they, if they come across an advertisement in the category, so again, this is amongst beauty shoppers, if they were to come across an advertisement in the category, how likely would they be to stop and read, listen to it, pay attention to it? And so that's what these numbers here are representing. So for beauty magazines or beauty shoppers, magazines takes the top spot in terms of being able to capture and hold someone's attention as they're flipping through the magazine. TV kind of takes the second spot here, and then you have some other various channels, so direct mail, newspapers, etc. So we measured again 14 channels in this case. Those were the top 7, and then the next 7, you can see social media taking the 8th position, and followed by magazine websites and then magazine apps. And the magazine digital properties came out stronger here in beauty than their again digital counterparts. So general websites or just kind of general mobile advertising. In terms of as a source of information, so we looked at 19 different sources of information, including non-paid advertising sources. So role of family and friends or in-store, etc. So we'll just look at a few of them here just to kind of show again the progression of certain channels as you go through the path to purchase. So we'll first take a look at at the consideration stage, how important are these sources, or how influential were they for consumers in making kind of a beauty product purchase. So in-store, in this case, really important. So again, that last moment of truth, still very important. We know from other research, if consumers go into a store with a brand in mind, they're more likely to purchase that brand versus being persuaded in store to purchase other brands. So it's important to get your brands on the list, or at least into consideration set before walking into a store. And then company websites also provided some influence and a good source of information for consumers. And then magazines, so the red dotted magazines and TV, they're actually the same position in terms of as an important source of information. And as you progress along through to evaluation and then also purchase, you can see that magazines and TV do go up consistently as an important source of information. So really those two channels really playing an important role in the beauty path to purchase. We also, so I've been talking about magazine media kind of at a higher level. We also looked at 4 different components of magazine media. So editorial, for example, so kind of unpaid, ads, so paid advertising in print specifically, magazine websites, and we looked at magazine apps just to see if there's any difference. Were they playing different roles along the path to purchase? And so we see some very strong consistencies with kind of the overall channel, editorial, ads, and the websites and apps all again playing or the strongest being at evaluation and purchase. So you can use those specific channels similarly along the beauty path to purchase. Now I want to touch upon food. So food, again, similar idea. We wanted to figure out amongst the food shopper, what is a trusted source of information. So in this case, of the top 3, it's pretty much a tie. So we have magazines, TV, and newspapers. There's a slight edge for magazines when looking at the category influencer, but again, they're equally kind of very strong when it comes to trust or being seen as a trusted source. On the digital side, again, emails, pretty strong here in terms of trust. And again, this could be from the brand, it could be from other mailing lists, etc. Magazine websites makes the top 3 here as well, and then online video ads. And so online video ads, part of it could be just recipes, so ads attached to video recipes, etc. in this case. And then in terms of, again, for this category, the stickiness of advertising. And so we see slightly different dynamic here in food, with TV taking the top spot in terms of being able to capture and hold someone's attention. So a food buyer, a food purchaser. And then we have kind of a tie for second place amongst newspapers, magazines, direct mail, paid and free newspapers. So we actually split out paid and free. So again, using those channels to really influence the purchase or the food purchaser are quite important. And then in terms of the digital side, we see again that magazine apps, also amongst this shopper, magazine apps and digital website or magazine websites also performing stronger than just traditional mobile or general websites. And I'll play out these in terms of sources of information, similar to what we saw in beauty, and I'll play it out here. We see a big spike with food in terms of magazines, and this is where recipes become really important. So as people get closer to purchase, as they're making their shopping list, magazines become much more important at this stage. TV as well, and TV spikes up at the purchase stage, and magazines stay quite consistent with evaluation. And so again, kind of, important channels. Newspaper, so in this case, newspaper, TV, and magazines becoming quite important. Company websites, they are important at the beginning, but then become less important as you get closer to purchase, and in-store, of course, is the most important in this case. But again, levels off from evaluation to purchase. We see something similar here in terms of each component of magazine, with ads being, just as strong in evaluation as they are in purchase, and magazine apps as well. So magazine apps, being such a new channel, encouraging to see such strong numbers, and numbers that are almost competing with magazine websites. So there's still big opportunities there, and that channel is obviously growing. Now the last category I'd like to spend some time with is automotive. So in terms of automotive, in terms of trusted media sources, so this is amongst people who are in the market to buy or lease a vehicle in the next 6 months. What sources they look to, what sources do they trust for information about cars or automobiles in general. So TV, newspapers, and magazines, again, top three in terms of trusted source, so very consistent in terms of source of channel, and even amongst influencers. The ranking is very close. Slight edge with TV over magazines, but again, so in terms of implications for your media plan, these should be kind of part of an integrated campaign. On the digital side, we see that magazine websites actually rises to the top here. So again, this could be our automotive specific sites, for example, but again, the trust coming out of those brands really shines through here. In terms of where people recall seeing advertising for the categories, we'll look at consideration, evaluation, and purchase. Again, TV takes the top spot here, but with newspapers and magazines, again, kind of playing an important role. And for magazines, consideration is the strongest. They're the strongest in the consideration phase in the automotive path to purchase. So really bringing brands into the consideration set along with TV, and playing that important role to get people at least thinking about your brand as they move along to the next stages of their own process. So that being said, when people do see an automotive ad in a magazine versus other channels, TV is very similar, they're more likely to stop, read the ad, take in the information than other channels. TV is very similar as well, but magazines really performs very well with influencers, and it's a channel, it's a category where word of mouth is actually more important. So big ticket items, consumers are going to be looking to their friends and family or advocates. So the fact that it performs quite well, very well, actually over indexes significantly amongst that influencer base, allows advertisers to generate kind of that increased ROI, and allows to spread beyond their typical spends. And in terms of digital space, so mobile pops up here as well. Social media, magazine apps perform strong in the digital arena here too. In terms of by magazine media component, so again, we see consideration performing the best out of each channel, but it's editorial, and actually editorial can help you in the evaluation stage, right? So getting people to compare and contrast the models or the car or the vehicle that they're considering, and then also magazine apps. So magazine apps is the one kind of magazine medium that actually plays consistently throughout all the stages of the path to purchase, so it can be leveraged uniquely in your campaigns as well. So to bring it to a close, I just want to end off with some key takeaways that we've learned in this study that I think are important for you to consider. as you develop your campaigns and your media plans, etc. And so number one, print and digital magazines are the most effective at reaching that important early adopter group in all categories, and those influencers, so those brand advocates. And if you can touch them and if you can resonate with them, then that explodes your media ROI beyond kind of just your typical base. Readers are more emotionally engaged. We found this, more emotionally engaged with magazines than other channels. So making them more receptive to the content and advertising that gets communicated and disseminated through there. And so kind of allowing that channel to be a little more persuasive in terms of getting people to purchase your product or service. The channel captures and holds attention. So kind of beyond reach and frequency numbers, when people are, and this goes to the ability of the channel to capture and hold attention or just engage with consumers, when people see advertising or flip through and see advertising, they're more likely to spend time with it, to read it. And because part of it is they're less likely to be multitasking versus other channels. Magazines are the relationship medium. So we saw, Robert mentioned this as well in terms of trust, and we saw here in this study that consumers have a deep relationship with the channel, and it's anchored by trust. And anchored by trust because the channel has a number of, it's a brand. So there's personas that are built around the channel that consumers are connecting with, making it an effective channel. And consumers are inspired by the content. So it's a content-driven channel. The ads, the editorial, the magazine, that it delivers, and because of that, and because the ads are contextual and they're built kind of within content that consumers are already seeking, it tends to be more favorable towards the consumer, and consumers are more open to the messages that are being delivered through the advertising. And then in terms of the digital space, so ads on magazine websites are seen kind of by consumers at least to offer a premium. And so they're more likely to be open to advertising on magazine websites versus general websites. Again, part of it because it's contextualized. So they're already in the mode of that content, and because magazine websites can deliver that contextualized advertising, that consumers are more open to that. And the importance of print as a source of information is closely in line with television along many of the stages of path to purchase in these categories. So again, kind of using the channel to synergistically communicate with your consumers, using those channels together to really exemplify your campaigns. We're seeing that play out in this study. And in terms of each of the stages, magazines we saw most effective in the beauty category at the purchase stage. For food, was most effective in evaluation, and for the auto sector, was most effective at the consideration stage, so bringing people into that kind of important consideration set right at the outset. And that concludes the presentation, so thank you very much.
Well, clearly there is a lot of information, and we have yet to drill down as deeply as we want to go into this database because it's wide, it's deep, it's long. And so over time, I'm sure there'll be a lot more information that we'll be pumping out to hopefully answer these kinds of questions that we're getting today. But right now, I would like to please call our panel up on stage. We're going to talk a little bit more about what we think about this advertising. So please come on up, folks. I'm going to introduce Corey Kobzina, who is the General Sales Manager at TC Media, Mike Lamb, who is Director of Corporate Sales at Rogers Publishing, Robert Levy, of course, President of Brandspark, who you saw earlier, Clarence Poirier, who is Vice President of Research at St. Joseph Media, and Aaron Schnarr, who is Director of Integrated Sales and Marketing at the Reader's Digest Association. So let's get into some questions. And Clarence, I'm going to pick on you first, if you don't mind. If there's anybody who's been close to this, it's you from the very get-go as to what we were trying to achieve. And so as we were conceptualizing this study, I just would love you to speak to what it was we wanted to do. Mark talked a little bit about it, but what can you add? I know you were brilliant in explaining this to me not long ago. Do you remember what you said?
Not really. But really, in terms of a lot of the information out there. There's a lot of trends on media usage. Not as much information on the use of advertising in the medium. So we want to make sure that we were really getting down to, yes, we're not dumb. We know there's, more time spent online. And I'm sure everybody in the audience has seen the chart in terms of ad spend versus time spent online. And it's a little bit misleading. When you look at online and you look at the fragmentation, people used to talk about the fragmentation of magazines. But, really the average consumer has, a choice of, titles that are in the hundreds. If you get down to what's really relevant to them, you're getting into the tens. Online, you got 6 million websites, pick your topic, you have, in the thousands. So how do you drill that down into, if I'm investing advertising in a specific site, what's the return on that? So we really want to make sure that the discussion was focused on advertising. And then the other thing, the other challenge that we always have is what's the relationship to the actual purchase. And it's just a huge leap, to go from advertising to I bought the product. There's a whole bunch of steps. There's pricing, there's the sales staff in store. So how do you, separate all that and understand that? So that just necessitated the path to purchase approach, where it's like, okay, how are people considering what they're going to buy? How do they narrow it down all the way to I'm going to go to the store and buy that? Mm-hmm. So that was, the basic thinking behind it.
Robert, I suspect that outside of our research committee, which of course Clarence is chair of, anything you'd want to add to that? Because you and your team obviously, were working very closely with the development of this.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Clarence was alluding to in terms of the path to purchase. So we conduct an annual survey with marketers. We now have our 8th annual results, which we're just about to release. But again, this question hasn't really changed in terms of asking marketers what are their most important brand marketing issues. So number 1 and 2 are tied. Maximizing my marketing ROI is number 1 in terms of what marketers are trying to accomplish. It's their jobs. It's what they're being measured on. That hasn't changed. And ensuring my campaign creative resonates with my target market. So I think what's groundbreaking about this study is, again, really linking it to the path to purchase, because again, it does go beyond time spent. It reminds me of the work we did, the groundbreaking work that BrandSpark did with the IAB way back when I was on the IAB, and we created the CMO study, the cross-media optimization study. And even then we saw in certain campaigns, I think we did a campaign with Dove and Beauty, where we saw magazines have a critical role in terms of ROI and purchase. And I think the key thing for us is to link this path to purchase, which is really how marketers are talking, because it's not about saying this works all the time, or it's as simple as time spent equals effectiveness. We now know it has to go beyond that. And I think the challenge is for marketers as well, and this is where I think we have the opportunity to keep working, is because generally the media where marketers feel is the lowest ROI just happens to be the ones that are hardest to measure. It's out of home, it's newspapers, it's magazines. But just because something is actually hard to measure doesn't mean it doesn't have a critical role. And I think that some of the traditional media are more easily overlooked in favor of new media. Marketing spend isn't increasing, it's being shifted, and it's kind of very easy to shift, but with one exception, and that's television. So that's the one that's always fascinating, because ultimately it's still not so clear that everyone has such a great understanding of the ROI for television, but it's the one that everyone perceives has the ROI. But the other 4, out of home, newspaper, magazines, radio, the more traditional ones, they're perceived to be harder to measure, and so then sometimes they get overlooked. And I think that's the opportunity here. By linking it to path to purchase will allow the agencies and marketers not to overlook established media that actually can deliver substantial ROI, and work hand in hand with some of the new media, which is what we think is exciting.
So we've seen, I think, some very good news in this study. And it sort of begs the question, why? I think a lot of it's for a lot of reasons that we've already known through past research, all kinds of studies. that point to a lot of the strengths of magazines, and yet this seems to pull it together. And Clarence, again, I'm going to pick on you if you don't mind. You know, when you look at this and figure, in some respect, you know, this data is good. Is it, maybe it's too good, you know, in terms of some people will look at this and say, you got to be kidding, really? Why do you think this has come together in this study this way? I mean, why, what connections are you making in your head that are sort of pulling it together and make some sense to you?
Well, the first thing, you know, the biggest point to make in terms of magazine trends, you know, we still have our audiences. And I think that surprises a lot of people because, you know, let's be honest, we did the study because we're being challenged for advertising dollars and we want to get those dollars back. Mm-hmm. But our audiences never left us. So, you know, in this environment where there's, you know, exponential more media choices, you got information coming from everywhere. And, you know, a high percentage of it is inaccurate. You know, you're going to go to where you trust. And that's what magazines have always had. You know, magazines are these communities of like-minded consumers that, you know, of course advertisers want to, you know, connect with that group. So in that light, when you really think of, you know, what is the essence of a magazine and what makes somebody choose to buy a magazine, and I think that's what makes magazines unique as well, that that's actually a purchase decision as well in most cases. So, you know, what makes somebody in Nova Scotia want to buy Chatelaine and what makes that person the same as the person in British Columbia who also buys that same magazine, or whether it's Toronto Life or whatever. So in that context, you know, in terms of where advertising is going to have its most impact and, you know, what we talk about, the halo effect, in that essence, it's not surprising.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything to that? We've got lots of stuff to talk about. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So we've seen all of this. I suspect something has particularly stood out for each of you in terms of something that you thought, you know, that was either surprising or particularly cogent or whatever it might be. And, you know, we've got a room here full of people from big media agencies, from client organizations, advertisers, and of course from media organizations, or sorry, magazine media organizations. So I guess my question to you is, what really stood out for you that you think would be relevant to the people in this room? And again, if there are any surprises, feel free to pick those out. Who wants to take a whack at that?
I can start. For me, I think the thing that stood out the most was the fact that magazines, the strength of that halo of trust that the magazine brands have. And I mean, I think we kind of take it for granted a little bit, but just to see the power of that halo of trust and that relationship that consumers have with our brands, I think that's really, really resonates for me. And it's really important for advertisers to link their brands to our brands. I think that's something that, you know, sometimes gets overlooked. And I think that's a great opportunity, especially as our brands really evolve into social networks, into, you know, the apps and digital platforms. I think there are many, many ways for advertisers to leverage the trust that we have with consumers. The one thing that did kind of surprise me a little bit was the early adopters and the kind of the number and the overdevelopment of that group within print magazines, because early adopters are really important, obviously, to launches of new products and to innovative line extensions. And it really shows me that magazines are really, rather than just putting your launch into a TV campaign or into digital, thinking, okay, that's where the early adopters are going to be. To me, it's really interesting that magazines are actually indexed the best of all media for that group of people. Mm-hmm. So to me, that was a bit of an aha, which is good news.
Anyone else?
The only thing that kind of stood out to me was just some of the scores of tablet, and I'm assuming that that's just because of you know, this stage in terms of adoption of the tablet editions of magazines, because we're seeing some really strong engagement scores with our tablet apps, and is that exactly the case? It's just a matter of adoption of.
I mean, I think it was, again, going back to the early days when we were starting to work with the IAB and online advertising. And at the beginning, people just took kind of ads that were developed for print or TV and put them first on online. And the biggest problem we had was in the way the ads were engaging. It wasn't that people weren't there or weren't interested, and it took time for marketers to start to develop context appropriate for online. So it's the same thing, I think, with magazines. So there sometimes I've gone through this myself and just read an issue of magazine and it just repeats the same thing. So I haven't gained anything by actually being in that edition, whereas there are other ones like the HBR, for example, Harvard Business Review, where you read it, it's coming to life, it's engaging, and almost makes you want to spend more time with it. So I think it's a question of time and evolution, and I think we're going to see the interest is there, the trust is there. It's a matter of delivering on an experience that's going to, the expectations are also high, I believe, with consumers. You're probably starting to think of these leading edge or really good examples, but is that really what's happening? And it's just like out-of-home advertising. How many, it's the example that I use these days quite often, how many people know about Philadelphia's chocolate cream cheese, right? And how did you find out about it? Because it was well done. And how many products are in outdoor where you just don't even notice it, or there's just cluttered, or it's not too much information. So I think the brand connection to digital is there, we've seen, in the brand trust. And it's probably one of the biggest opportunities that I think so far magazine brands have missed, because you can see there's all these new brands for recipes. Well, those should be trusted, where you've gotten your recipes. But right now, it's a website like allrecipes.com that came out in a digital age. That brand didn't exist. That should be Better Homes and Gardens or Chatelaine or Canadian Living. And I think that's where the media brands have been a little slow to invest in the digital, because it's been hard to figure out how to make money. And so now I think that they're kind of catching up quickly, and I think the opportunity's there because those brands have been built over 40 years, and so that to make that connection.
I also like what I found really interesting in the study was the level of engagement and that conversation. We all know, working in the magazine world, the extent that we have an engagement and conversation with our readers and our users and our site visitors. But it's nice to see that it was captured in a study and actually in a quantitative way. And even the apps, even though it's fairly relatively low in the numbers perhaps, but the influence they have in the decision-making process is impressive, considering it's such a relatively new medium. And people are still kind of figuring out how they're going to be using it. And for it to have that level in magazines of influence, it's quite an interesting one. That was a bit of a surprise to me as well.
I mean, the interesting part, again, in the marketer study is we ask marketers sometimes the same questions that we ask consumers. And one of them is, which media do you pay attention to? And again, consistently, the results this year, the top 3 was TV, magazines, and outdoor billboards. And yet, it's only TV that marketers are able to link through the path to purchase, whether that's the amount they spend or how it comes back in the tracking research. But they are consistent with consumers in terms of also, but yet when it comes to understanding the role that it can play in a campaign, that's the part that there's more challenge. That's where I'm hoping now linking this really for the first time to the path to purchase is going to help marketers and agencies try to craft when it's appropriate.
So let me extend on that then. So we've got all of this cross-media information throughout the path to purchase. So we've got a lot of people in this room who are paid to try and figure out how to use this stuff. What tips can you give them? What can they be doing with this? And maybe the real question is, why should they care about this study?
Well, I'm not sure that there's ever been a time where advertisers need to understand how the different media platforms play together and work at the different stages through the purchase cycle than right now. And I think that there will be a lot of interest to look at this and see how that works. And I just hope that this just helps to inform better decision, to support some of their media choices. And for people that are publishers, for us, because we now have multiple platforms that we're offering our brands on, hopefully this will allow us to build better solutions for our clients.
I think the other thing is you can see maybe where some of the untapped opportunities lie. One example is the automotive category. At the consideration stage, there's definitely a spike there that I don't think a lot of advertisers think about or take advantage of in that category. A magazine potentially could have an opportunity to, if you look at magazine advertising and even television advertising for automobiles, it's just beauty shots and kind of fluffy information typically. And then people would go online to the manufacturer's site or to a dealership to get the kind of the nitty-gritty. But when we see the strength of a magazine, for example, at the consideration stage, a smart automotive advertiser would look at that as an opportunity to, kind of be where the others aren't, with a lot of information and a lot of detail about their product. And then they could potentially kind of rise above their competition, leveraging a new channel that others aren't using. So I think that's an opportunity for us to, really take that message out to the market and to try to expand our relationships with automotive advertisers. So that to me is a really good learning from the study that I think advertisers can take advantage of and hopefully prosper with.
Well, I know we're running out of time, so let me try and quickly wrap up here. Thank you very much, panel. If you want to just stay there, we're going to take the next 4 minutes or so just to sort of wind this up. So first of all, I hope you learned something new today. Clearly, there's an awful lot of information. As has already been pointed out, there are reams of data that we need to still get into. We've talked about regional, for example, and really pick that apart and understand what's there. But one thing you can count on is that as and when we go through that process, you will all be kept in the loop as to what we're finding. We now have your email addresses, which means that we can feed this stuff to you if you don't mind. So that will be coming. And this new research, I should say, this is, I hope you would agree that this has been some very positive news here, some good news that moves, everybody's agenda forward, whether you work for a magazine, whether you work for an agency, whether you work for an advertiser. But I should say that this new information comes on the heels of some other very positive news over, certainly over the last year, the last few months. Some of it driven by, new trending data that we're seeing coming out of 2012. So I would like to just quickly share some of this with you, and some of you may already have seen or heard some of this, so please indulge me. First of all, publishers continue to launch new titles. There are more Canadian titles available today than there ever have been in the history of this planet. So clearly magazines aren't going away. We launched 20 new titles in 2012. We closed 2,000 of the 1,300 titles that are out, which is on average over the last 10 years, exactly what usually happens. So we're still launching new titles, which is good news. Print circulation continues to rebound after the pre-recession levels, as you can see here. And in fact, we're now distributing about 2/3 of a billion Canadian copies annually. The spring PMB report, as you probably already know, it reaffirmed in a big way that print readership remains solid. Readers haven't gone away, as Clarence said. They're still there. They still love their magazines. We're still spending the same amount of time, frankly, with magazines than we always have, despite the fact that everyone in this room and all of our readers have increasing time pressures, as well as more and more media choices that they can choose. So they just find the time to spend time with magazines. Younger Canadians, 12 to 24, 25 to 49, the most technologically savvy generation ever. They're the most heavily penetrated demos of print magazines. So the tech generation certainly hasn't abandoned magazines, nor have our established readers. And I think, to no one's surprise, that the penetration of digital magazine reading continues to expand. It's about 9%, and they claim to be digital-only magazine readers now. There's another 19% who read digital and print equally preferred. So that leaves about 71% who are print readers, 91 for you purists out there who would add in those who also love digital. And as I said before, it's one of the reasons why we did this study, of course, is, more and more we understand we are media agnostic. We need to be. It's not just about print. And so, whether they choose a print or a digital application or an app, really doesn't matter. It's whatever suits their specific need. It's called catering to the consumer. And content. You have to talk about content when you talk about magazines. It remains king, whether it's print, whether it's digital. They continue to deliver wanted content. The readers, as we've established, trust, and more importantly, pay their hard-earned cash for 1, 2, even 3-year subscriptions into the future. I mean, name another business where you see that kind of connection, that kind of depth of connection. And of course, we're talking about a context in which full-page advertiser dominance is the norm. It's uncluttered, it's unfragmented, it's the kind of environment that ads pop out of and that consumers respond to. And in fact, Adobe, don't know if you've seen this slide before, but they recently did some research that supports the fact that magazine ads, we're talking print magazine ads specifically here, are preferred versus other forms of advertising by both professional marketers and also by consumers. So, and I think that's somewhat corroborated by your research. And finally, just this combo of content and all the many connectivity benefits that we've discussed today add up to consumers taking actions in big ways. And if you look at some very recent research, over 60% of readers net take action after reading a magazine or even editorial in surprisingly similar results. So clearly the power of the surround as well as the advertising is indisputable. So, if magazine's dead, well, let me tell you, nobody's told the reader yet. They still buy magazines, they still read magazines, they still love their magazines. And the simple fact is that magazines are changing. And they're changing and evolving the way that they always have over literally centuries, meeting the needs of a constantly evolving consumer. So they are playing in all the channels that really matter to consumers. So, enough of the sales pitch. 3 very quick thoughts. First, a very big thank you to the Ontario Media Development Corporation, the OMDC. They provided important support for this program and other things that we do. Secondly, please take just 60 seconds, and amongst the paper that was on your seat, you're going to find an evaluation. Let us benefit, please, from your thoughts about today. And lastly, in terms of what's next, we're going to be sending you all a link of today's presentation. We videotaped it. We'll be sending you a link to that as soon as it's edited together, and we'll have that in your hands shortly. And you can ensure that as we dig deeper into the data and have new findings, that we'll be sending those out along to you too, just so that we can keep you included in the conversation about how this research is going forward and how it might help you. In the meantime, if you have any questions about anything, call Magazines Canada, email us. Smoke signals, don't care. Let us know what's on your mind. If we can help, happy to do it. If you'd like us to come by and speak with you in person, we can do that too. So there you have it. Thank you all very much for taking a big chunk out of your morning to join us here today. And please enjoy your long weekend. I'm sure it's well deserved for everybody. Thank you.